And that's when self-sabotage will happen. And that's because a big contributing factor to it is the inner critic. And that little inner critic says, but wait a minute, who do you think you are? You can't do that. You're not good enough. Don't you remember that? Hi, this is Jim Brillon. Welcome to my YouTube channel where we talk about all things mental health. Today we're going to be talking about self-sabotage, explaining what that is, how you can recognize it, and what you might be able to do about it. So self-sabotage, if you're not familiar with it, what it is it's an unconscious way that we keep ourselves from moving forward in life, from achieving what it is that we want. If you are familiar with it, you know what it looks like, and sometimes we can only see it sort of in hindsight. Some signs that you might be self-sabotaging could be, perfectionism and being really hard on yourself, or overdoing things, getting to the point of burnout. There's lots of ways that it happens in very subtle ways. Sometimes when we're disorganized, this can be a subtle way of sabotaging ourselves because we don't give ourselves the structure that we need to actually get things accomplished and make things happen for ourselves. We can sabotage relationships in lots of different ways by ignoring difficult feelings, by not allowing ourselves to be vulnerable. Getting caught into cycles of criticism and defensiveness can be a way of sabotaging a relationship. Holding grudges can be a way of sabotaging a relationship. And people who are sort of narcissistic, they feel like they need to control things. That's another way of sabotaging relationships. A lot of times when self-sabotage hits, it's right when a person is about to achieve some new level of success or a different plateau in their lives, and that's when self-sabotage will happen. And that's because a big contributing factor to it is the inner critic. The inner critic is that little voice inside that might have been there since we were children that tell us that we're not good enough or we can't make it. And it's interesting that, I've worked a lot with addicts and alcoholics, and people will go out, they will relapse right before their year anniversary or their 90-day anniversary. Because a lot of times what happens is you're about to reach some new level and that little inner critic says, but wait a minute, who do you think you are? You can't do that. You're not good enough. Don't you remember that? And that can start to bring up shame and anxiety, and that's when you turn to self-medication. One thing that you can do to start addressing self-sabotage in your life is to start to develop some compassion for yourself. Self-compassion, I think, is something that a lot of us really don't know how to do. Compassion for yourself doesn't mean giving yourself a break or letting yourself off the hook. What it means is recognizing your own struggles, your own suffering, and being kind to yourself rather than beating up on yourself. It's interesting that when you think about the way that people beat up on themselves, they'll say the harshest things to themselves when they make a mistake or they have a problem, things that they would never say to a good friend. So developing some self-compassion is one way to start addressing self-sabotage. Also, recognizing what that inner critic is and figuring out where it comes from. A lot of times that inner critic that we develop, it starts in childhood, and maybe at first it seems to protect you from getting hurt again or getting caught in the same kind of problem that you have before, but it can also make you kind of small, keep you from reaching for your goals. And once we grow and we become adults, that inner critic doesn't really serve us anymore. That's when it starts to self-sabotage us. Another big part of the self-sabotage component is our cognitive distortions. And cognitive distortions are those mind traps that we get stuck into. They're filters where we filter everything that happens in the world. Cognitive distortions can be things like getting trapped into black and white thinking, all or nothing thinking, That's where you see everything as either good or bad. Personalization, taking things personal when they're really not about you, is another cognitive distortion. Blowing things out of proportion and not looking at the positives and really focusing on the negatives is another form of cognitive distortion. And those are things that, working with a therapist, you can start to explore what they are and how to challenge those things. Cognitive behavioral therapy can be really helpful for identifying these cognitive distortions and mental filters that we have, and learning how to restructure our thoughts. Perfectionism is a big form of self-sabotage, and when we set ourselves up to be perfect, the reality is that nobody and nothing is really perfect, and that's a big self-sabotage trigger. Ultimately, when you start to look at the factors behind self-sabotage, it generally comes down to a person having a low or a shaky self-concept, those internalized beliefs, those core negative beliefs that we have, excessive need for control, and that's when you see the sabotaging that happens in narcissistic relationships, or just fear of the unknown, fear of change. It can keep us from moving beyond, the goalpost that we've set for ourselves into some new frontier that we may not be really that comfortable with yet or know what it looks like. In order to overcome self-sabotage, you want to start identifying the behaviors, first of all, looking at how that happens in your life. Learn what the triggers are, what sets you off. That might be looking at those cognitive distortions or other things that happen. Reframing our concept of failure and how we relate to it. The fact is that everybody fails at things. I know I do. I try things that don't work out, from time to time. And the thing is that you can't allow a single failure to convince yourself that you can't succeed. And that's one of the seeds of self-sabotage. Talking about it and taking it out of the shadows and talking about it and putting it into the light is a good way to start to approach it, and to really do some work on your values and what's really important to you, understanding what it is that you really want. So, looking at the ways that you might sabotage yourself or set yourself up unconsciously and trip yourself up is a really important first start to working on bettering your life and moving past the places where you're stuck. If this content is helpful for you, I hope that you'll like and subscribe and get notifications. And if you are looking for some help and you live in California, reach out to me in the information in the description. And I look forward to sharing more information with you.